Hello, everyone. Great to be with you. My name's Mark. I'm the Safeguarding and Cybersecurity Manager at LGfL. LGfL looks after about 3,000 schools, giving them broadband and all kinds of other services. But we also provide services for all schools in the country, regardless of where they are, in all kinds of areas to do with technology, lots of different areas, but the particular focus is about keeping children safe for us in our team. So whenever we talk to schools, settings in education of all ages, including the early years, within a few seconds, people talk about support for parents and how can we help them. So for that reason, we're particularly delighted to be here with you today. But I'll be back a bit later. For now, I'll hand over to Alex.
Thanks, Mark. So morning, everyone. My name's Alex and I'm part of Mark's team in LGfL. And I'm just going to take you through the first bits of the presentation this morning. So on to the next slide, thanks. Okay, so this morning we have got an hour together and the plan is to go through a few bits of research and to talk about some current trends with screen use in the earliest years. So we're going to share with you some information that we have about screen use, what the research tells us about early years children accessing screens, and then we are going to explore how we can support our youngest children to access screens in a safe way. So we're going to give you some practical tips, hopefully, to take away. So like Julie's already said, please do ask questions as we go through the presentation today, and we will try and answer as many of those as possible. We will also give you a handout which will contain the slides that we're going through today, as well as some links to other information that might be helpful to you. And if we don't get around to answering all of the questions, then we'll make sure that that is also cascaded to you after the event today. Do keep yourself safe. We're not going to be sharing anything particularly horrendous and scary with you, but we will be talking about what some of the latest data shows us about young children accessing screens, and we will be talking about some of the risks associated with our youngest children accessing devices as well. So just be mindful about anybody else who might be able to hear this presentation, and if you do indeed need to take a break from anything that we're talking about, then please do whatever you need to feel safe in today's webinar. Next slide, please. So to start with, we are going to be talking about our babes, their brains and screens. So just to be clear, what we're talking about is internet-enabled devices. So that might mean a tablet that your child is using. Maybe they're streaming YouTube. Maybe they're streaming a BBC iPlayer on your TV. It might be a phone. We're talking about all internet-enabled devices. And obviously, there is a huge, diverse range of things that our children are now accessing. And the first thing to really talk about, and something that we all know as parents, is that those first 5 years of our children's life are so important in terms of their brain development. When our human babies are born, they're actually born with quite immature brains. If you compare it to other mammals, a dog, a cow, a zebra, actually their babies are born with much more highly complex and developed brains than our human children are. And what we know is that those first 5 years of a child's life are so important, because it's those first 5 years when all the brain connection, all the neural connections in their brains start to fire and start to develop. And it's those connections which lead us to have all the skills, the abilities, and the personalities that we have as human beings. So if it's the first 5 years when all that connectional activity is going on, then it's those first 5 years and the experiences that our children have that are so critical in shaping them and shaping their habits long into their lives. So it's important for us to think about the experiences that they have, and therefore today we're thinking about their experiences of using screens. Next slide, please. So the real detail of this slide, I really don't need you to read, so don't worry about reading all the small text on the screen here. But this is a diagram that we've taken from Birth to 5 Matters, which is guidance within the early years sector. And this diagram is particularly pointing to what it is that helps our children to develop into healthy, well-rounded children. So I thought that this was quite a helpful diagram to start with, and for us to think about what is it, or how is it that development is influenced by children's screen use. So the first thing to think about is how our children consume content online. So most of the content that they will be consuming will be through a passive process. They will be looking at a device, a phone, a tablet, a TV, and it's usually quite passive. Now, as we know, in the early years, it's really important that children are moving about, that they're playing, that they're physically moving around and ambulant. And that's really important because not only are their brains developing, but actually their physical bodies are developing at a rapid rate as well. So it's important that they get that experience of gross motor skills, that they're crawling around, that they're moving as much as possible, they're rolling over when they're babies. All of that is critical in terms of building the muscle mass. So we need them to be as active as possible. When they're sat in front of a screen, obviously they're much more passive and sedentary. So that is one issue, is that when we provide screens to children, that they are much more sedentary in their lives. So if you think about a child, maybe they're awake for 10 to 11 hours of the day. Some of your children might be awake for longer, but let's say 10 to 11 hours of the day. If they're sat in front of a device for 1 to 2 hours, actually that's nearly a fifth of their day. And that time could be spent doing other things that are much more developmentally valuable. So that's another thing. On the screen here, it says about replacement. What we see is that sometimes screens are being used to replace other activities. And we know it's important that children are outdoors, that they're engaging in reading, that they're singing, that you're singing with your children, that you're having that reciprocal interaction, that they're having sensory opportunities. All of those types of opportunities really do shape children's development. But when we're using screens, actually sometimes that's displacing or replacing other activities that are much more beneficial and valuable to their development. Screens also hijack attention. So we know that online content is designed to maintain our attention. You know, the developers of all the social media apps, the websites, their key aim is to keep us hooked on. And that is the same for all content. So not only are children potentially spending quite a lot of time on screens and maybe not always realizing it, but also what we tend to find is that the content that children access is usually quite fast moving stimuli. You know, if you've ever seen Cocomelon, sorry if you have, if you've ever seen Cocomelon, it's a really fast moving program. There's a lot of stimulation, there's a lot of color, there's a lot of sound, the screens move very quickly. That is all intentional because actually it keeps children hooked because they're constantly bombarded with the stimulus, and that keeps their attention. There's an issue with that in the fact that what we're seeing is that children who do access more screen time, they are actually finding it more difficult to pay attention when the stimulus that they're provided is a lot less. So perhaps when they're sitting down reading a book or when they're doing a jigsaw puzzle, that is a lot lower in terms of stimulation value. And if children are used to and seeking that high velocity input from a screen, they might find it much more difficult to sit down and engage in those other types of activity. We also have information about when children are young, we are hardwired, when we're babies, we are hardwired to seek input from a parent or a caregiver. We're hardwired to have that kind of cooing between parent and baby, that when a parent smiles, the baby learns to smile, you know, that back and forth. We call that reciprocal human engagement, that serve and return, back and forth. When we're accessing screens, children don't get that back and forth. It's usually completely one-way communication. So again, what some research has shown is that children who have excessive screen time is actually they can sometimes lack some of those social skills because what they've been getting is just simply one-way communication. So they might lack social skills. They could also have differences in terms of their language development. And also what's been shown is that sometimes they can lack empathy as well, because there hasn't been that opportunity to engage with another being in that back and forth type of way. The other thing just to say is that we know that there is lots of marketing in terms of apps, games, learning resources, specifically for our children in the early years. And what I would just encourage you as parents to be is skeptical and curious about some of this stuff. Some of it will be great for children, but what the research has shown is that when our children are using a game or they are accessing online content in this particular age range, actually the learning value comes from when they're with an adult engaging in the material. So if you put a child in front of a device and put a particular learning activity on that device and told them to get on with it, or gave it to them to get on with, then actually the learning value of that is very low. Where the learning value comes in is if you had a parent or a carer sat with them and talking to them about what they're doing, really checking whether they're understanding it, extending what they're learning, taking it into the real offline world. That's where the real learning value comes in. So again, just a word to be kind of skeptical about some of the marketing. You know, as a parent of a child in the early years, I know that there's a lot that we are told is really great for our children, but just be curious and be skeptical about what some of these things actually do, and whether they really, again, have that developmental value for our children. So next slide, please. And all of this kind of information, this research that we're now aware of, has kind of culminated in guidance being shared by people like the World Health Organization about what they suggest is appropriate screen time for children in the early years. And we're not sitting here being dictatorial to you and telling you you must follow this advice and you must think about these things, but we're just sharing with you what the information, the research and the guidance suggests. So the World Health Organization suggests that if you have a child under the age of 2 years old, they shouldn't be accessing screen time, because actually what they acknowledge is that all the other things that children get in terms of story time, singing, outside play, sensory play, all of that is much more valuable to them in terms of their ongoing development. And then for children 2 and over, the guidance is that sedentary screen time should be no more than an hour, but less is better. So here we're just thinking about kind of minutes, specifics around the actual time, but also we need to be thinking about what that time is made up of. Are they just sitting consuming a program on YouTube Kids or BBC iPlayer or something, or are they actually looking at a yoga video and taking part in some yoga moves, for example? So not necessarily just the amount of time that children spend online, but actually what are they doing when they're online, when they're accessing screens? So just a few things to start thinking about. And I'm going to hand over to Mark now, who's going to take you through what some of the research suggests and data suggests in terms of risk.
Thank you, Alex. Alex, if you want to have a look at the chat there, I've answered a couple of questions, but I think there was 1 or 2 more in there that you could maybe answer, but hopefully my answers make sense, what I put in there to the people that did have questions. Thank you very much. And in terms of screen time, there is something that I'll show you a little bit later, but definitely don't get obsessed about the time, even though we're talking about here for the much younger years, but just really think about the what first, because the what is certainly going to give you a great guide to it as well. Certainly below 24 months, they don't recommend it as it says on the screen, but think about the what anyway. Are you with them? Are we doing things? Is it creative anyway? It's going to make a massive difference indeed as you go up. Oh yes, you can't see the questions. That's because I popped them in the hosts and panelists box. I'll just do that before I move the slide on, because I'm not sure anyone else can see it. There was one answer, and give me a second. There's the other. Right, so moving on. I'm going to, if you're wondering in terms of the practicalities, I am going to come back and do some screen sharing to give you really practical things on what you can do on different sorts of devices. So that will be in a few minutes time. I'm going to show you an iPad and an Android phone with some of the things that you can do, that if you are going to be using a device, you can lock it down in ways, some are more complicated than others, but there are some really easy things you can do to at least limit to a certain app or whatever. Okay, so let's move on. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of stats. So there's a few slides here and you'll get sent them. The first couple are from Ofcom, and every year they do a massive survey of media behavior and use for adults and for children across the different age ranges. So really interesting to see the trends. And then, so in about 2 slides time, I'm going to be showing some from the Internet Watch Foundation. Now, they look for child sexual abuse online. Don't worry, I'm just showing you some graphs, but just bear in mind that that might be a little upsetting in terms of you know, the fact that this even happens at all, but it does help illustrate why we need to do some things. So if we look at the slides on here in terms of online activities, at the top you've got 3 to 4 year olds, at the bottom 5 to 7, and I know lots of you will have older children as well. You can look through the Ofcom report to find out a bit more. The name is on the bottom of the slides that you will be given, but 92%, the one on the left of the purple diagram, video sharing platforms. So that's probably something to think about. Alex mentioned about, we've got YouTube, we've got BBC iPlayer, we've got kids versions of various different ones as well. But if we're going to be allowing children to watch video platforms, are we thinking about how they are? How are we controlling them? Can they even be controlled in terms of content? That's more of a question for you to take away with you, I guess, and think about a little more. But also, we found this was particularly interesting. In the previous year's survey, they were talking about tablet ownership, and still tablets are a lot more widely used by the youngest children. But even at the age of 3, 20% of 3s and 4s have their own mobile phone. I've put a couple of questions in the green box for you to again think about as well. If that many have got their own phone, many more have got a parent's device. And yes, for under 3s, which lots of you might have, they didn't ask about that as well. But the key thing to think about with such a widespread, with all the things we know are going on the internet, are we actually either supervising, or if we're saying sometimes it's simply impossible to supervise, and we don't want to patronize anyone or say that you must do things that are impossible for you given your circumstances, but what steps can we then take about it? So are they being supervised? Think about for children in general and for yours. But in terms of what Ofcom found out, there are some statistics here for the different age groups. The older ones will be interesting for only some of you perhaps, but probably the best thing to realize there is the red thing at the top, that 13% of children of all ages don't supervise child's online access. Now, you might think for an older child, that's really not a problem, albeit we need to stay discussing and communicating with teenagers as well, because there are very different and unique risks as well as opportunities for them. But with the youngest ones, we really do need to be thinking about that. So these statistics here probably would be best for you to take away and think about in the light of what Alex has been saying. So I'm not going to say any more on those. Now, I did say that I'm going to show you a couple of stats that are definitely troubling. First of all, in terms of why does it matter that we're supervising what they're doing? You know that there's lots of content on the internet, on apps, sites and games that's inappropriate, but unfortunately there is lots of sexual abuse material online being found for young children. And if you look at the graph there, you won't be able to see, even though the green on the left that is minuscule for age 0 to 2, it's minuscule in terms of the graph, but it does represent real lives and really ghastly things happening online, with 1,000, for example, instances found by the IWF last year. So just to kind of think about what's going on when children have devices, and that we need to protect them from certain things in terms of children being tricked into getting undressed online, for example, and we have a resource that can help you with that in a really fun way, don't worry. There are some interesting statistics there. Now, from the graph here, which is showing ages, there's nothing for the younger children, but I've popped in the slide pack a case study for 3 to 6 year olds, which is more for you to take away, a bit like some of the other stats. But there are increasingly instances of 3 to 6 year olds generating material themselves. Like I say, could be tricked into getting undressed, and then these things are shared. So I'm not saying panic, but both in terms of what Alex was saying about restricting in general, but also what I'll be coming on to in just a couple of minutes about controls that you can make sure, for example, they're only on an appropriate app that you have chosen. And of course, as parent, you're the one to choose. I think that's yet another reason to make us stop and think about that as well, especially given, as we can see here, there are more than half of children, and this was a couple of years ago, saying they sleep with their mobile phone by the bed. And if 20% of 3 to 4 year olds have got that, we would argue that the mobile phone in the bedroom is certainly something that should not be happening for adults as well. And I know that will be challenging for lots of us. So yes, you can buy an alarm clock that's not a phone, but for our children as well, it's really important to be considering some of these things. So I will be back in a couple of minutes to show you actually things that you can do. So I've got an iPad screen and an Android screen to show you where the settings are, that you can do something about it if you're going to let your child have a device. But first, back to Alex for a moment.
Thank you. Okay, so some of the risks, not to scare you at all, but that's the reality. That's what the research is showing us, is that young children are getting devices earlier and earlier, and sadly that there are risks associated with that, especially in terms of generating images of themselves. So one of the things around parents supporting children with using devices is the fact that sometimes we can feel a bit dinosaur-y, can't we? Sometimes it can feel a bit scary. We don't really know what these apps are, what these devices are. There's so much technology out there. It changes so often that we can just feel a bit out of it. And I'm sure that there are a number of people on the call that feel like that. My main piece of advice is you don't have to be a tech expert to be able to support your child with using devices safely. Some of the information on the screen here is very much things that any parent can get involved in. So I'm just going to take you through kind of these 6 steps for really how you can best support your child to be safe, to be healthy, and to be well when they're using devices. The first is about deciding. It is your decision. Don't let anybody railroad you or peer pressure you into using screens and devices with your child unless you want to. So it's for you to decide when the right time is for your child, and each child is different, but when is the right time for your child to start accessing devices? And when you've decided that, what devices is it that you want them to use? What are you hoping that they get out of it? Is it that, like me, sometimes I just need half an hour to get dinner ready, and I use a device for that purpose? But what is it that you're trying to get out of that time? And make that conscious decision. Don't just leave it up to chance, or don't just leave it up to luck or somebody else to decide. Try and take control of that decision. Secondly, when you've decided what it is that you think your child will best benefit from or you want them to access, then try and learn about the device that you want them to access, or try and learn about the particular game or the particular website. And what we're going to share with you in a moment is some resources that will help you with that. There are lots of really great parental guides, parental guides out there about how to use parental settings on different devices, and also parental settings on particular apps, particular sites, particular games. So remembering that parental settings are appropriate on both. So you might have to set up turn on certain settings on the actual device, and you might actually have to then switch on certain settings on the particular game or the particular app or the particular website that they're going on. So it's really important that we do kind of overcome some of our fears about getting involved with technology, but there are great guides out there that talk you and walk you through these processes step by step, so you are absolutely not on your own. Thirdly, talk to your children. So the best thing that you can do is to build up an open, trusting relationship with your child, so that you are engaged, you are interested in what they're doing when they're online. What programs is it that they like to watch? Why do they like to watch that? How does it make them feel? All of those things might seem really mundane, really simple, but actually what we're trying to do is set a great foundation and a great relationship in place for our children, so that as they grow, if things do go wrong later down the line when they're using a device, which sadly happens for lots of children, that they have that relationship with you where they're able to come to you and say that this has happened, and they know that you're not going to rip off their head and jump down their neck. So it's really important that we start that process as soon as a child has a device, that we're starting that process of engaging and talking to them about their life online, and we're showing an interest in that. Active engagement is about when children are using screens. As I mentioned earlier, the best thing we can do, if possible, is to actually sit down and look at what children are engaging with, and be interested about that. Talk to them about what they like. Try and extend perhaps some of the things that they're doing in the offline world into the online world, and vice versa, so that there is this kind of ongoing engagement in all areas of their life. What are they interested in? What do they like to play? Extending some of those skills. Fifth, try and monitor what they're doing. So absolutely in the earliest years, don't just leave them to get on with it. Don't just set them up on YouTube and say, fill your boots, go and watch what you like. You know, do look at what they're accessing, because sadly, sometimes, especially with things like YouTube, you get the autoplay, you get videos just bleeding one into the next. So you do need to have an active responsibility around monitoring what they're doing when they're online. And perhaps sixth as well to think about is kind of the rules that you set up with your child about, so how long are they going to have on a particular device, and maybe set those rules before they go on the tablet or start watching something on the TV. Before they do it, already have that conversation, because it's much easier to talk about it before, as we all know, than actually saying at the end, right, your time's up, stop, because that's when you get all hell can break loose. So having some of those ground rules established, and also talking to children about how screens make them feel. And a very live example is something that my son was watching. He's 4, he was watching something online, and actually he found it really scary. And I thought that this was the perfect opportunity to talk to him about how something he's seen online has made him feel. And I was talking to him about how it made his body feel and why he didn't like it. And that, for me, was a really good opportunity for him to then understand that if there is something that makes him feel scared, that he comes and talks to me about it. So having those particular types of experiences and taking those learning opportunities, in my view, is really important in terms of what we're expecting children to do as they grow older and their contact with screens becomes greater. So set some of those ground rules, and also think about how you are role modeling screen use in your family as well. You know, it's a fundamental part of all of our lives. We are using screens a lot. Are we demonstrating to our children what we would expect them to do? Are we walking the walk, or are we telling them things and actually not reflecting that in our own behaviour? So we've got something that we can share with you later that you might want to consider thinking about within your family, where perhaps we do a bit of self-reflection and think, perhaps I need to get off my phone a little bit more, and I need to get involved in more kind of active play with my child, rather than it all being sedentary. So I think that can be a bit of a helpful reflection point for a lot of parents as well. So some 6 key tips here, which don't require you to be a technical wizard. These are things that all of us can do, and all of us can get engaged with. Okay. Over to Mark, who's going to now take you through some of the more practical advice about using certain technology.
Thank you, Alex. I just finished typing an answer to one of the questions. That was very good timing. Brilliant. So yes, I said I'm going to move on to some practical things, and I'll go straight for some controls. When you get the slides, you're going to get a link to somewhere where you can come and find out a bit more of this. And I'll also be showing you some things live, and I'll take a few screenshots at the end to send it back to you. So hopefully that's fine. But I can't see any of you, but maybe if you pop in the chat, if you let your child use an iPad, and if it's, for example, your one with lots of your work stuff or your home stuff on, and are you aware of the way that you could really easily lock it to a certain app that you've decided on? Yeah, tell me in the chat while I'm demoing this thing. And now this is where it generally all goes wrong, because I'm sharing from a couple of different devices. Woohoo, it's still here. So this is my iPad at the minute. So let me just put that full screen. So there's a thing called guided access. I'll come to particular controls in a minute, but a really, really simple thing to do is called guided access. So If you don't know where it is, just start typing guided access. You'll see it pop up. It's under the accessibility things. So if you then go to the menu, there's a little toggle here, which is important to turn on, because if it's not on, it won't appear. Once it's there, you can then add a little passcode, time limits and things like that. But the more important thing is to show you how it actually works. So imagine you've got your personal emails. You don't want people clicking around. Imagine you're using a work device. You might want to think about whether that's allowed or not. But this is really handy. So imagine then, imagine you're using Roblox. Now, I know that we're talking early years, so they probably shouldn't be on Roblox. But I've got a 9-year-old who likes a bit of Roblox now and again. Once you've activated it, like I just showed you through the settings, all you need to do, if she comes and says, can I do Roblox? And I want to make sure that she's not going on anything else. And I'll come back to, there are some settings from Roblox that are really important anyway. All you do, you won't be able to see this because you can't see my finger, but once you've opened the app, triple click it, not double, not single, but triple, which is a bit fiddly. And you get that little menu, and down the bottom just above council is guided access, which wasn't there if you haven't toggled it on. So the bit I showed you before, you only ever need to do once, but thereafter go to the app you want to lock them into, press guided access, and you can either circle an area of screen to disable, all sorts of fancy things you could do, but generally what I would do, click options at the bottom, 30 minutes. You could turn on and off various buttons if you want, but generally I'd set a time on it, and then back to the top right of the screen where it says start, press start. Oh, okay, it's forgotten the code. Let me just this will remember it. It's because I turned it off. There we go. Can you see in the middle of the screen? It says oh, it's gone now. Guided access started 30 minutes. So if I press the home button trying to get out of it, nothing happens. And if I try and turn it off, it would ask me for the passcode and the like. So really simple way. Do pop in the chat if you think that sounds simple, because I know some of these things can be complicated. I'm about to get on to the more complicated ones, but that beyond turning it on is really simple and a good way. Once you've decided, like Alex was saying, you're the parent, you can decide that they're allowed to use the device or not in the first place. You can decide on which app, and that will lock you in. So really handy way beyond all the much more complex controls, which I'll show you in a minute. I can see someone's got their hand up. If you could pop your question in the chat though, because I don't think there's a attendee you can speak anyway, but we'll try and answer them in order. So that was that. Before I go into general controls, as I've got Roblox up, I should mention that there are lots of parental controls in Roblox. It can be a bit fiddly, but actually they're really quite effective. So I had heard all sorts of stories about things that are on Roblox. When I first let her go on it, I spent ages looking through the parental controls and linking them. Took a while, but actually since then, I spent the first few months saying you're not going anywhere near it unless you're sitting next to me, and I haven't seen anything particularly dodgy, albeit some things are slightly gory in a Lego kind of way, but that's again something for you to decide. I digress. So let's go back then to the settings for the more complex thing. That's the easy one. The more complex one is called screen time. So if you why is it, oh, it's gone away. Hold on, I need to start broadcasting again. It should come back. There we go. Hopefully you didn't miss anything I said there. So if we go back to the settings menu on the left of the screen, hopefully you can see where it says screen time. This is the one that is a bit more complex, but it's worth doing. So if, for example, this is a device, it's not yours, but you're giving to the child to use, this is really, really handy. So you click on it, turn on screen time. Let me not get this wrong. Okay, and then here, can you see we can say what the general age is, which would help set it roughly. We can choose what apps can be allowed or not, books, TV shows and things like that. You can do all sorts. So for example, web content, you could say allowed websites only. Personally, I think it should say no websites, but there is a way to do that. I'll get back to that in a second. You could allow them to add apps, delete apps. I could spend ages clicking through this, but I think you get the general idea. And once you go through that, you can then say what apps are allowed. If I just click through, the thing that I just skipped through said, I went a bit too, oh, there we go, time away from screen. So you could say, even though it's best not to have the device in the bedroom anyway, you can very easily here say, at every day, 6 p.m, 7 p.m, 8 p.m, it locks. You can't use it at all until the next morning. Particularly handy for the older ones as well. So you don't have to have arguments about, are you on your device again at night time, because you can lock it. So you could set this up once and every day it will lock. That's one thing that you can do, is set up the downtime. Also, what you can do is put limits for these as well. So you can go through and say which particular apps you can do. It's a bit hard to do while I'm sitting there with you. But as you work through these different options, for example, I had a really old small iPhone that I gave to my younger daughter a couple of years ago. I set all this up, and the only thing she could do in it was take photos and listen to music. So, and also it was limited time anyway. So since I couldn't buy an iPod Shuffle anymore and all the CD players broke, I thought, yeah, let her do that for a little bit of time a day, but no internet, no Safari app. So she could never do anything beyond those things. Really easy to set up. So that is the Apple way. I know lots of you will not be Apple people. So if we hop over now very quickly to the Android version, if I can find where my window is, which I can't. Hold on, bear with me. Oh, it's here. Right, here we go. So this is my phone. It's an Android phone, and there's a thing called Family Link. Don't worry, we're giving you links to where you can find all these things, but sometimes it's better to have a look, isn't it? So the Google version is called Family Link. What you do with Family Link, you can see the little logo at the top. It's kind of a kite, but find it on the App Store. And even if you've got kind of an Apple device and they've got an Android device, you can still control it that way. What you do is you install Family Link on your device and on their device. You say, I'm the parent. When you install on theirs, you say, I'm the child, and give it permission to control the device. And it's essentially the same kind of thing as on Apple. So this is one, for example, you can, if you just have a quick look, so I don't need to read everything out to you, but what's on the screen, you can restrict games and films and books. You can require approval for all content. So this is really good. On the Android version, a child can say, I want a new app, and they can look in the App Store, but they press a button and it pings your phone to say, can I install that app? So my eldest daughter, for many years, I got every day a request to install TikTok, and every day I clicked no. I don't know why she kept on doing it. But that's one that you can do. Again, with the internet, you can see here, you can allow all sites, only allow approved sites. You can add to your list as well, if you're going to give them anything around those. I'm losing track of what I'm trying to say, but for the devices, it will pop up on here, and then you can have a look at exactly the same things as we saw on Apple. So I think you get the idea. It's essentially the same kind of thing with slight differences. You only need to set it up once. Yes, it requires a bit more time. The very first thing I showed you with guided access, that doesn't exist on Android, but still you can do the overall settings. You can set bedtime so they never need to use it at night. Even if they come and sneak it from downstairs, you don't need to worry because you've done that on either of them. So both for your youngest early years children and for older ones, really, really key things. Now, let me move on to a really key resource. I'm not really looking at the chat, but I can see one asking, does that work for Kindle? It's not the same thing, but there are Amazon parental controllers that are quite complex as well. They're a bit trickier to use. I haven't got time to show you now, but for example, I wanted to get some of the Audible audio stories for children, so I got an Alexa device in order to allow that, and you can do all sorts of Amazon settings in the same way as well. Basically, if you look on their parental settings page, there is a lot. I found the Amazon ones a little bit tricky, but once you've done it, they're really good. So in terms of a takeaway for you to have something to look at that will refer you to all of this, there's a website called parentsafe.lgfl.net that we have set up to support parents. I'll pop that in the chat for you, but I'm sure the ladies from the Early Years Alliance can send that on to you. This is a site that should support you with keeping children safe online and beyond, that we've put together for parents. And I'm not going to show you everything on it, but for example, safe settings and controls is what I've just been talking about. So that's one of the first settings here, with a bit more, indeed the link to the Apple website that talks you through screen time, family link, which I just showed you as well, but also for Microsoft devices, there are things you can do on there. There's loads of resources for parents on this page. Also, in terms of finding out about apps, I'll show you a couple of links in a minute. If your child asks you about an app, what can you do about it? All these resources are here to help you. Alex mentioned about having that conversation that she had with her child. If you're wondering how can we do that, talking to children about life online, some of the tools here could be handy. So there's a family agreement. This is probably for slightly older ones than early years, but obviously they grow up, as we all find. So the family agreement is something that you can look towards in older years as well, agreeing what you as a child and what the parent will do. There's some examples on one of the sheets as well to help you with that as well. So sometimes it can be really tricky to know how to talk to a child as well. And then some of these resources will help you with that, as I've been saying. Someone popped in the chat about some handy books that you might want to read to discover some of these issues, so that it doesn't need to be online at all. But Goldilocks here is a device-based story that's probably a bit more well-known. So what I'm going to do is just open up the online zoo, which has been translated to all sorts of language. You click on it, click the book, and you could print this out or do it on the screen however you want. But it really is great for the early years in terms of a friendship story about the zookeeper and the animals getting into hilarious scrapes because they're doing something silly on the device. And I would suggest, even if you're going to say they're not going anywhere near a screen for many, many years, it's still a great thing to be talking through because it has valuable life lessons about friendship and looking after people and teasing and all that kind of thing in a real child friendly way. Personally, I quite enjoy reading it, even though my children have grown out of it. So I read it to myself sometimes and it always makes me feel better. So back to screen to Parent Safe. There's some sections on screen time again. And particularly as your children get older, the digital 5 a day from the Children's Commissioner is a really useful thing. Let me zoom in so you can see the screen, where rather than just focusing on minutes, but for focusing on the minutes, the parental controls, technical things that I showed you are really handy. But beyond that, think about the what. Don't just think about how long, because as you said, lots of children are asked at school to spend quite a lot of time doing homework and the like. But Children's Commissioner worked on this, so to think about, are we being mindful, connective, being active? And you can be active even when things are related to a device. Often you need to put it down first, but creative as well. So it's not the same for us too as adults, scrolling through Instagram, getting depressed because everyone else's life is perfect and we feel fed up about it. That's very different to learning a language, learning to code, watching a tutorial to learn origami and then going and do some, or speaking on a video chat to your grandparents who live in a different country. No one would say that that's a bad use of time staying in touch with family in that way. So just bear in mind, this might help relieve you a bit from some of the stress once they get old enough to be using a screen at all. Of course, we want to remember the recommendation that under twos don't really need that and are not particularly helpful for their development anyway. So these are some of the things that you can find from that website, which is in the chat. And it does go for much older children as well, as they reach puberty and beyond, all sorts of different topics you can go through. There is just one little video I want to show you. If you click on body safe, we can get to undressed, which looks a bit like this. So the cat and the girl. And the Pantosaurus one next to it as well are a couple of resources that might be really useful for you to look at. You can also get straight to this link if you go to undress.lgfl.net, which I've popped in the chat. So I'm just going to play you a few seconds because I do need to stop so we can take your answers. But I'm just going to show you this and think back to those statistics, the scary ones from earlier, about that often we think, oh, what can we do? Well, how about this?
Playing with your phone can be lots of fun. It can make you feel like you're number one. It can be cool when you come home from school and still see your friends through the camera lens. But remember the rule and what you learned at school. Even if they're a pest, no, don't get undressed. Just put down your phone or pad and go check with mom or dad.
So I'm just going to mute that so I can talk over it for a bit. So we produced this and we've given it to schools to use around the country. And in terms of getting a really simple message across about if you're going to get changed, if you're going to get undressed, if you're going to put fancy dress, swimming costume, whatever on, you put the phone down, and in a really simple way. So lots of your children will have seen this in settings as well. But if not, you could watch it with them as well. In terms of you don't want to go into to scary things, but it's just a simple rule, isn't it? It's a simple rule, like don't get in a car with a stranger, that kind of thing. And the other videos here on the body safe section are similar. Lots of you might have heard of Pantosaurus from the NSPCC. And there's one here called Jessie and Friends that I'll just play in the background as I wrap up. That has a little song about if you get a funny feeling in your tummy, what to do, and that kind of thing. So there's a little song in there that can help you with it. Again, they might watch in their earlier setting or primary school as they get to that as well. So these are links that are in the chat. You can see them. Let me just see what else there was that I had to show you. There are a couple others that are at the end of the slides, so I'll just show you that in a second. But in terms of parental controls for other devices, some of you asked about other ones. We've got links to these as well, both from Parent Safe and on the chat. Common Sense Media does really great ones for apps and games and films. Where parents review it, the experts review it to say, is it appropriate? So you can choose from the links at the top. Is it an app? Is it a game? Is it something in the cinema? Is it really right to show or let my 7-year-old play this 18+ game? You can probably guess the answer, but with some comments from children and parents and the like. That's a great way to do it as well. Also on the links at the ends of the slides, takes you to CEOP, which is part of the National Crime Agency. They do some great education work, but are talking here about under fives in particular, how to keep them safe. So I can pop that in the chat now if you like, but it's coming out a little bit later as well. Wouldn't let me do it, never mind. So that was that. Let me just see, was there anything else? We've got some slides just showing the things that we've talked through. And yeah, this is the slide that's nearly at the end that will come back to you in terms of the things that we've looked at, and also some of the other ones that we've just clicked into. So Alex, was there anything else that you wanted to say, or are there any questions that are pointed at me?
There are a couple of questions just as you were going through the parental settings. So Charlotte asked, can you set the screen time settings for different users, for example, child and adult, if they share one device?
If they share one device, no, then you would have to do it each time. But if you, for example, use the guided access one, which is the very first thing I showed of just locking you in an app for a certain period of time, you can change that time every time you turn it on if you want to. For iPads and so on aren't really set up for multiple users. But if you've got different devices, you can still control them all from the same app. So from one phone you can control several different ones. But yeah, that is a limitation if it's just one device being passed around. So I'd use the guided access if it's an Apple one.
Okay, and Mrs. A, sorry, I'm just reading what you show up as. I don't know your name, sorry. Mrs. A says, sometimes we want to give permission to a website once or only for that day, but it seems that once you've approved it, they can access it all the time. Is there a way around this? Do you know?
Probably not with the ones that I've showed you. There are lots of other parental control apps out there. Generally, it's better to start and try and get the best out of the ones that you have built into a device, if you like, in terms of it's a Google device, use the Google things, it's an Apple one, use the Apple one, both in terms of data sharing, because they already have your data of what's happening, but they're going to look after the device. And often with external third parties, you've got to give them so much control of the device. You just need to, I'm not saying don't use them, because I have as well, but be a little wary and look for the different ones you have. But otherwise, I don't think you can do that particular thing beyond just leave the app open and then turn it off a bit later.
Okay. Kathy, you asked, is there a central resource anywhere that lists which games and apps, etc., are suitable for certain ages? Well, Common Sense Media.
Yeah, I think it's 1 and 2 on the screen at the minute, which I showed both of you. I think both of them are really good, but they're both linked to from the Parent Safe site as well.
Yeah. Lydia, what are some of the signs of screen addiction in 5-year-olds? Oh, my daughter goes on her tablet in the mornings and I've noticed she gets up earlier and earlier, and I wonder if this is linked to device usage in the mornings. Possibly. I mean, my good advice is if it's a problem, then it's too much. If you see that it is affecting your child's behaviour, you know, I've got a friend whose child was going through a period where they were having massive meltdowns every time they were coming off of a device. That was a problem. Therefore, it was an issue that had to be addressed in terms of how much they were watching it, and trying to bring in that talking and communication about it's not okay if it's making you feel that angry, that upset. So if you're spotting that there are particular worries, like you're saying, you've noticed it impacting on her potentially getting up earlier and her sleep, then yeah, I would absolutely explore whether it could be that because of the stimulation of the, I don't know why she's using, but, oh, sorry, you said tablet. So it could be the blue light. It could be the fact that she's just really keen to get on it and do whatever she's doing on there. So I would absolutely explore that and maybe think about whether she can access the device at a different time, and talk to her about it as well. Talk to her about how she is feeling, what she is enjoying. Yeah, I think some of the general tips and advice there is useful.
On that, in terms of those conversations as well, some of the Jessie and Friends animations, I showed you one, I didn't play the sound, but you could watch a couple of them together. That might start the conversation, because you have someone that gets a bit scared, and that might give you ideas as well of, oh, do you ever get scared when you look at things or whatever? And hopefully if they're getting up earlier and earlier and you reduce the time they can do, then that might help them not want to get up earlier, and it would also give you an answer.
That question that's just come in, is there a way to lock down YouTube so they're only able to watch age appropriate videos? My toddler uses it to watch car videos, and I always sit with him and know what video will load next.
Yeah, I was supposed to talk about YouTube, wasn't I? YouTube is a bit of a pickle. I'll be honest. It depends a lot on what device you're on. The best way to lock down YouTube is if you're on Android. On Apple, it's not really possible in the same way. You can certainly block YouTube and allow YouTube Kids. I don't know if you've heard of YouTube Kids. It should be fine for toddlers. So I would suggest block the YouTube app and allow the YouTube Kids app. As they get a little bit older, and not much older, as we know, they tend to be annoyed by the fact it's got the word kid in it, even if they are very, very young. So sometimes that's not great. Plus the kids one does have very young content. I think for a toddler, that would be absolutely fine. However, once they get beyond that, and you will know, because they'll certainly let you know, it is tricky. So on Apple, essentially, no. On Android, if you use Family Link, which I think I've now stopped sharing, but I'll see if I can get it up again while Alex answers the next one. But I'll just say, if you use Family Link, there's an option for YouTube where you can enforce a certain restricted mode, and schools can do that because you do it in a bit more of a complex way when you have a whole network, which you generally won't have at home. So you really are best off using Family Link, and I'll just get that up and show you what it looks like. But essentially you choose a restricted mode, which would help a lot with that as well. Yeah. Anything else to?
No, it's just about, yeah, YouTube and the restricted mode. If we can't do it now, we can send around some information afterwards. So I'm aware we're coming to the end.
It's essentially via Family Link. I think I showed you one of the things at the beginning. It's the same app, and you click on YouTube, and then it's got some options for you. So yeah, there's probably no need to show it at the minute. Once you get Family Link on, then click on YouTube, and it gives you some options. So Android's the best for that.
If there are any further questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll keep it going for a little bit, just so that you can add any into there, so that we can answer those and send them around to everybody. But yeah, if you've got any further questions, we'll also just put our email in the chat. Feel free to pose those to us on an email as well.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Alex and Mark. Some real practical information there as well that parents can take away with them and set up straight away. So thank you ever so much for that. And as Alex and Mark have mentioned, we'll make sure you get all of the information that's been shared. We'll make sure all of the links go out to you following this session today. So keep an eye out for that follow-up email that'll have all of that information for you. We wanted to mention to you our Family Corner. So this is our family arm of the Alliance. There's lots of expert articles on there, activity ideas, online learning sessions. The articles are written by ourselves and also as a professional such as Alex and Mark. There's an interesting blog on there from themselves as well. That's where we'll also pop the video recording of today's session. So keep an eye out on our Family Corner page and our Family Corner Facebook page as well. We'll make sure all of that information heads there. And you'll also find lots more about our upcoming Family Connect sessions as well. We've also got a session coming up for those of you here that may be educators, so you might be working in early years settings. There's another session for yourselves on the 28th of June, and that's 6:30 till 7:30, and you can access that by going to our main website, or again, we'll make sure we pop the link to that into that follow-up email. So thank you once again, Alex and Mark, for such an interesting and useful session. And thank you to everyone for coming along, and hopefully we'll see you at future Family Connects. Thank you very much.